Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Predators, in which the Sharks lost 4-2. And so in the final game of their season series against the Predators, they will drop it. However, the fact that they won the first two, I guess, is something to take solace in, but losing the third and final game of that season series obviously doesn't feel that good. And it was also a squandered opportunity because the Sharks, with the Calgary Flames losing earlier today, the Sharks had the opportunity to reclaim first place in both the Pacific and the Western Conference and take back control of their own destiny, but instead they walk away with 0 points and they still remain a single point behind the Flames. And this was a pretty disappointing game, actually very similar to the game against the Florida Panthers. The Sharks sort of just looked a step slower than what they normally look. So I don't think this is any sort of worrying sign, but it wasn't that great of a game. And while the Predators weren't completely dominant and this was a horrific game for the Sharks, it was just sort of subpar. And it started in the first period. Again, in the first, I wouldn't say the Sharks were that bad, but I just thought the Predators were all around better, and it showed on the scoreboard. They were the team that scored the only goal in that period, getting Colton Sissons very early on. Then come second period, the Sharks did manage to tie it up with Timo Meier's 27th, but Predators came right back. Victor Arvidsson making it 2-1. Then it would be Joe Thornton with the next goal, an angry Joe Thornton after he got into it with Colton Sissons earlier on, went to the box, sat 4-on-4. Then he scores on a later for 4-on-4, and it was 2-2 at the end of the second period. So in a game where the Sharks seemed maybe a bit sleepy, they had the opportunity to actually take this game against one of the Western Conference better teams. But in the third period, it would be the Predators who would get the game-winning goal, and that was Filip Forsberg off of a pretty lucky bounce off of the stick of Tim Heed. And this was a game that sort of came down to bounces because of the fact that, once again, the ice wasn't very good, because once again, the San Jose Barracuda played a game before the Sharks did, the doubleheader that keeps all the fans interested or whatever, but sort of has some issues with the ice. And once again, as I said before, that when you have this type of bad ice where plays can't really be made, you take some skill out of the game and you put in a lot more who's going to get the bounces either way. And it felt as though Nashville were getting the majority of the bounces, but then again, the Sharks not necessarily playing that well that they deserved to win, and so maybe the hockey gods are punishing them by allowing the Predators to get those bounces, but still, it was somewhat unfortunate in that regard. Then, of course, Victor Arvidsson added the empty netter, and the Sharks lost 4-2. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones. I thought Jones actually had a pretty decent game. I know a lot of people were pretty down about it. I don't think he had much of a chance on the first two goals, Sissons and Arvidsson, but most people are really talking about the Filip Forsberg goal. As I said, it was an unlucky bounce off of Tim Heed, but the fact that it was ever in a position to really bounce off the stick of Heed, many people blamed Martin Jones for that, because basically what happened is he makes a save on a point shot, saves it off of his blocker, he sort of deflects it, and it's supposed to go to the wall or wherever to, not be a dangerous rebound, but Filip Forsberg knocks this puck down and gets right to his stick, and then Jones sort of stretches out on the right side, comes out of his net somewhat, and Filip Forsberg is able to just easily wrap it around. And while this puck would have just gone across the crease, if Tim Heed's stick wasn't in the way, you could say Martin Jones shouldn't be overplaying like that. But I've mostly looked at it at the fact that you sort of jut out like that. Jones would do that because he was maybe expecting Filip Forsberg to take an immediate shot. But Forsberg, playing it very patiently, decides to not do that. So I feel like it was more of a 50-50 choice. You could definitely say it was maybe a bit of a misplay, but I don't think it really takes away that much from Martin Jones. I thought otherwise he had a pretty okay game. I liked a couple of his windmill glove saves. We very rarely see that from Martin Jones, so I guess that was nice to see. And so it was mostly the offense that I felt like sort of let him down. I guess 3 goals is not great, but it's also not that bad either. Next, I will talk about the second line because, of course, this is the first time we are seeing the line of Kane, Hurl, and Nyquist, a line that I predicted would happen once Nyquist was required, but Kane has only played in a single game in which Nyquist has been involved in prior to this one, and Nyquist, I believe, started on the Thornton line in that game. That was the game against the second game against the Boston Bruins, and now this line was put together, but of course, Nyquist having very little chemistry with Kane. Kane hasn't played in a while, so I thought there were some moments where this line looked like they could do something, mostly because of Tomas Hertl generating some great opportunities. But I do hope De Boer does keep them together, because I do think they have the potential. Once Kane does get back up to game speed after missing a couple of weeks, once Nyquist does start to find some chemistry here with Kane and I guess Hertl as well, although Nyquist has played a bit more with Hertl, and of course once Hertl is able to sort of bring his two wingers in together and really work as a good unit, I think this could be a very dangerous line for the San Jose Sharks. And so down the line, I feel like in the top 9 seems pretty locked in place at this point, so I feel like there's very little way for movement. The only thing I could see is maybe if De Boer wants to go with Couture, Pavelski, Nyquist, and then move Meier with Hertl and Kane, because he has done that a few times. It's technically possible, but I would like to see this second line a bit more. Next, I will talk about Michael Haley, as of course the Haley versus Donskoy situation finally came to a head, as it was decided that Michael Haley would start the game here against Nashville. And I didn't necessarily have a problem with that because of the fact that you could send Jonas Donskoy a message, because he hasn't been playing that well as of late. But it'll be very interesting to see what he does against the Golden Knights, because you would think, okay, bring Donskoy back in the lineup, that's the optimal way. But the Golden Knights are a pretty heavy-hitting team with Ryan Reeves and William Carrier on the fourth line, so you might want Michael Haley in that game. At that point, you say, okay, fine, sit Jonas Donskoy one more game. But then the 2 games after that are games against the Ducks and the Kings, also some pretty heavy teams. So do you leave Haley in the lineup for the next 3 games and have Donskoy sit a total of 4? That would seem less like sending a message and more like an actual bench. And I don't know if Donskoy would have as much, I guess, like rejuvenated confidence if he's coming back after that long. So it'll be interesting to see what De Boer decides to do. Again, De Boer really likes Michael Haley for whatever reason, and so I suspect he may get this next game. But I guess it's technically possible if De Boer wants to try and inject something into this lineup, because it has looked a bit soft, I guess you could say, in these past couple of games. Finally, I will talk about Joakim Ryan. Of course, I mentioned yesterday that he had a very solid game, but it was always the consistency of this season that has really lacked for him. And so what happened in this game is that it was a bit noticeably worse than the previous game. I liked his confidence at times. I feel like he seems to be coming into his own as a player. So earlier on in the season, I felt like he was a lot more reserved, but he is making some very aggressive plays that are sometimes working out for him, and I think De Boer is rewarding that. Early on in the season, De Boer was benching him and leaving him with like 8 or 9 minutes a game, if not less than that. Tonight he actually gets close to 16 minutes, so I think he did like Ryan's game, or at least the strides that Ryan is making in his game. But there obviously were some pretty big misplays, honestly enough. Obviously, the first one on that first goal from the Predators, the Sissons one, Ryan just very weak in front of the net, not being able to stop. I think it was Craig Smith or somebody in front. And some other soft moments. But I thought all in all, Ryan was okay. It'll again be very interesting to see once Erik Karlsson does come back in the lineup, who will get the boot from it. Will it be Tim Heed or will it be Joakim Ryan? Because while I think Heed has been playing better for longer, as I've said before, the Heed-Burns pair isn't that great, and I think Ryan-Burns would be better. Now, of course, I've seen some people even suggest maybe they should just put Karlsson with Burns and then leave Vlasic, Heed, Dillon, and Braun, because those pairings have been pretty good. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns will ever play on sort of like a defensive pairing on paper. Those two will come on the ice sometimes when the team is trailing or if, there was an icing, but I don't think that's ever going to really be a pairing, and so I think Ryan and Burns might be something that occurs once Erik Karlsson comes back, but I could technically see Heed Burns if Ryan really does somewhat struggle here in the next few games. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Monday. They will face off against the Vegas Golden Knights in a pivotal division matchup. While I don't think the Golden Knights are really in any threat of passing the Sharks for second place in the Pacific Division, it's still sort of like a message type of game. This is a team who you could potentially meet in the playoffs. If not coming second place and meeting them in the first round, they could always upset the Calgary Flames if the Sharks come first. Very, very possible, because the Golden Knights are quite the solid team. And so the Sharks needing to send a message in that one. Their first game of the season versus them was a 6-0 loss. Their second one was a pretty tight 3-2 victory. And so this third matchup versus them is pretty pivotal to see if the Sharks have really overcome the hump that is the Vegas Golden Knights, because they've seemed to have the Sharks' number here for the past couple of years in their existence. Class dismissed.